So to me, what comes to mind is dedication, authority, the ability to get things done at a grassroots level, when without having a lot of red tape. They know their job. And of course, as a Navy chief, you're all rate specific, so you know your craft. Now, I know he's a craftsman, she's a craftsman, and they know how to get it done. They know how to handle it, and at the same time, there are those guys and gals out there that are training junior officers, because those first tour division officers that are on the deck place, they don't really know everything, and they don't learn how it really happens in the fleet. Those are what the chiefs are for. And the chiefs get out there and they make that happen, and they teach those young JOs how to become responsible officers, and then also teach them the crafts of the Navy, right? So whether it's engineering, combat systems, administrative, whether it's navigation, whatever the craft or whatever division it is, the Navy chief is who we rely on. They're the backbone of the Navy, and if we don't have that, that kind of support on the waterfront, we're dead. And as we look across the force, you can start to see sometimes as an example, the chief's mess, chief head officer's mess, isn't as strong as it ought to be, because you can see where ships don't do as well on the waterfront because they're not down on the deck plates handling their business. You have to be strong to be in the chief's mess. You have to be able to take ridicule, but you have to take it in stride, almost as in a sport, but not in a hazing kind of way, but as in a sport. One example was we were off on deployment, coming back from the first Desert Storm War. We were in the Mediterranean Sea, heading back. We were about almost to the Straits of Gibraltar. The XO called us onto the waterfront, and he called us out to the missile deck, all the officers and chiefs, and he said, "Come on, everybody, here's the deal. You can start kind of stowing things, taking it out of combat mode and putting them in their stow modes, stowing everything in their places." But because this is the last 2 to 3 weeks left in the deployment, he wanted more than one person to do the job. So it took one person to do the job. He wanted 2 people to do the job. It took 2 people. He wanted 3 people, because as we know, the most dangerous parts of any deployment are typically the first 2 to 3 weeks and the last 2 to 3 weeks. So there I was. I went down to my men and I said, "All right, men, here's what we got to do. We got to stow these systems, put these things away. And if there's 2 people, I want 3 people. If it's 1 person to do it, I want 2 people. And here's what I want you to do." So they said, "Aye, aye, chief," and they all ran off. And I went up to my space and I started working on my evaluations and some other things, awards. And I started to feel the ship heel over, and I heard this thump, 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 thump up the ladder, and my office door flew open, and one of my E5s was white as a ghost, and he said, "Chief, I did what you told me not to do." And I said, "What was that?" He said, "I went and tried to stow a launcher by myself, and it wouldn't shut because it was frozen in place and there was nobody there, and I got frustrated and I kicked the back of the launcher, and this big decoy went over the side of the ship. This $250,000 decoy went over the side of the ship, expanded, and there it is floating in the ocean." And about that time I got called to the bridge. So Chief Katz had to come to the bridge. I went to the bridge, and the XO was pretty unhappy with me because I had one guy out there doing a 2-guy job from his perspective. So I spent a lot of time with that on the bridge. What saved me probably from getting in a lot of trouble, and my guys, is that the captain, and nobody's ever seen this decoy open, so it became a learning. It went from a bad thing to a learning experiment. Everybody learned about this decoy. But the funny part about it is, and to kind of get back to the beginning of what my story was, is that I went down to the mess. This decoy is also called a rubber duck. We call them rubber ducks. And I sat down in the mess. It was real quiet. Started eating. And the next thing, all the other chiefs started going quack, quack, quack. So I lived with that ridicule for a while because one of my guys messed up. The chief, I absorbed any bad things that happened to my sailor. At the same time, I had a chance to correct him. And so that's one of my stories. Anyways, it was pretty funny. So my first chief was like my dad. When I was in EW, electronic warfare, I had a 2-year C school, A and C schools. And so by the time I got to the fleet, I kind of had a couple chiefs, but they were schoolhouse chiefs. They weren't really, looking out for us like a chief really does. And so my first chief experience was when I went out to the fleet. Senior Chief Damster was my division chief, and he kept a careful eye on us, and he measured us every day. He measured us for competency, he measured us for matureness, he measured us for operational skills and ability to do the job both operationally when we'd sit on watch, all the way to when we were holding test probes and wrenches and electronic test equipment. So he kept a careful eye on us, and when we were ready to kind of do it, he'd leave us alone. But man, when we weren't towing the line, he would be right on us. He'd be on us like a duck on a June bug, right? He was there, and then we always relied on him. He was that kind of rock foundation in my division. Division officers came to him. He kept the division officers straight. Just like I said earlier, that the chief's there to make sure everybody's doing their job and keeping them all in line. So, Senior Chief Damster was my first chief, and he was a great guy. He was really great. Another funny story. When I came in, you could have beards. Guys could have beards, and we hadn't had a Navy PRT. We weren't even doing Navy PT at the time, and so, in like 1984, I think, is when they said you had to get rid of the beards. And my senior chief had this really great pirate beard. It was nice. It was well groomed, and as soon as they told me how to shave it, he retired from the Navy, got out of the Navy. So, boy, he was stubborn.